wanted to let you know in terms of our organizing committee for this meeting. It consisted of myself, Bill Robinson, who talked earlier, and also Jerry Bruce. Unfortunately, Jerry is not here today. He was taken away with his wife on some vacation. But yeah, I just wanted to thank the efforts for all of us who were involved in organizing this. So our next talk is by Rick Hesselman. Rick's company is SA Environmental. Rick will tell you a bit about his background, but Rick's been extensively involved in inspections of septic systems, tertiary treatment systems, and brings a wealth of knowledge, which he'll put forward in his talk on inspections in general for septic systems. So please welcome Rick Hesselman.
I don't know if I can be confined to the podium. Can you hear me? If you can't hear me, I'll invite you to sit up in the two seats in the front. We'll talk a little bit about OOWA first. I think most of what I'm going to talk about in my talk, I definitely have to give some context. From what you heard this morning, I will probably contradict a lot of it. And I'll give my qualifications as to why I feel differently about different elements of maintenance re-inspections. So if you don't like it, hold your applause. But on the OOWA front, we're working on a new mission, and a lot of the other things that we'll do will trickle down from our mission statement. So it's to protect and promote the benefits and value of on-site and decentralized wastewater management through education, improve standards of practice, and advocacy for sound policies across the province. So a lot of what I'm going to say here is unrelated to OOWA. It's going to be my talk, but I thought I'd promote OOWA at the beginning. So my background is not technical. So on-site sewage system maintenance inspections. I do have an OOWA header there, but this isn't an OOWA presentation, so I'll qualify that right now. We will be working on a best practice on how to inform all of our members on how to do these things, but the context I'm going to give you is for real estate transactions, because that's the experience my company has, is for real estate transactions. But you'll note there's a lot of best practices that can come out of there, or I hope that what you see, if you're a regulator and you're involved in these programs, is maybe some risk mitigation strategies, or some areas that you might have some vulnerabilities in the future that you might want to consider. So an overview of the presentation on maintenance inspections. We're going to talk about some positive changes to how we think about our work. What are we involved in? And OOWA represents part of the clean water technology industry in Ontario, environmental and public health protection. It's more than just selling stuff, installing stuff, maintaining stuff, or inspecting things and issuing permits. We're all together in the clean water technology industry. You need to raise the bar for how we think of what we're doing. It's not just about construction or permits. It has a bigger purpose than that, particularly parts that are regulated under the building code. That's not just a construction document to me. It's not just enforced black and white. There's some importance to it in terms of protecting what is probably our greatest resource in Ontario, which is fresh water. We need to improve what we do through knowledge, so there needs to be more availability of best practices and dialogue about why different people do things different ways. I'll tell you how I would do things, and you may disagree. I'll probably be right, but we can talk. I'm going to come across as arrogant. I'm just kidding. We need to start taking some responsibility for what we're doing, and collectively as a group take responsibility. So this is a great venue, and I'm really impressed with all the regulated communities coming forward, putting the representation forward, and talking about how they do things. That's a big step, because that brings about some consistency in the future. It may not be consistent now, but I think you were talking earlier about your sewage pumper format, and then you talk to other groups so there could be some consistency. That's really what people are looking for. You don't absolutely have to be right, but you do need to be consistent. So I commend you for that. So what are we going to do? And what have we done? An inspection procedure brings all these things to the forefront. Why is it the way that it is? What are we going to do about it, and how's that going to impact the future? One thing about inspections is you find problems, you have to correct them. You have to make sure that the solution doesn't, in the future, become another problem. speaking, I do. Water is a local resource. On-site and decentralized is the best way to deal with rural sewage infrastructure, period. If in your job it's easier for you to think that a sewer is a better thing for your job, you're going to have an argument from me, because it's not sustainable in the long run. It might be easier to not have to process permits, or do inspections, or maintain them, or find out about maintenance inspection procedures and simple resulting. All that sounds like a lot of work, right? A lot of work means jobs. Sustainable long-term jobs. So if you're not on board with that, we can have a discussion. But it's not about protecting your job. It's about building an industry that helps out the province of Ontario. No booze. I noted that if people are thinking about what you're saying, they look mad. So we're going to change the context here. A picture that I stole from Septic Smart, and I'll commend Omafra and Rideau Valley and Terry Davidson and all that group for putting this package together. But we had on-site sewage disposal systems as our context, right? A lot of systems we're going to be inspecting are viewed by the installer, the homeowner, and even the regulatory community when they're put in as an on-site sewage disposal system. It's disposing of sewage. The context in the Ontario Building Code today is for treatment. So that's the view, right? Top down, it's a house, it goes in the septic tank and it disperses the sewage and effluent through the environment, and then you pump up the tank once in a while, that's your maintenance, everybody's happy, right? So the context. But if you change that over to a cross-section and you look at the impacts of that same system, same house, on the groundwater and surface water resources, what do we have to do before? Are you going to dispose of sewage into those resources? So we'll just change the title. It's like on-site wastewater treatment systems, and they need maintenance, they need care, they need good design, they need better installation. So just change the framework that we're talking about, the same thing, an industry we're all vested in. So we get to be part of the solution now. It's time for a change of context. That's not a failed system, that's a catastrophe. Sewage at the ground surface is how we judge whether or not, on the previous slide, how long does it have to not be able to go down and contaminate our groundwater resources before that happens? And if this is how you're judging performance and function, you're wrong. You need to look at that and think about the performance of the system in terms of its impact on the environment, the homeowner's environment, their neighbor's environment, and the community's groundwater resources. It's not just about what they pay. It's about a community's water resources. So be careful talking about failure in terms of sewage at the ground surface. I'll show you tons of pictures of those. It's the insidious part about it leaching into the environment and you not knowing it's contaminating your environment. That has to be part of the context where we're preparing to do maintenance inspections in the future. Recognizing we're not going to get this right out of the gate. We're dealing with a 50-year legacy problem of not having done maintenance inspections. It's not going to make it right in 5 years, maybe not 25 years, but we have to get our heads straight on which direction we're going. This is the one I've chosen. So we have an opportunity to do better than this in terms of maintenance and management of on-site infrastructure. A tremendous opportunity, and this is the time. We're here talking about maintenance inspections and on-site and decentralized systems, but we're allowing this to be found on inspection. Anybody think that tank is functioning in its intended manner? You may think that there might be a problem here. No problem from Tom. What's the solution to that problem? I'll take any answers. What's the solution in your mind? What's the immediate solution to that problem? Pump the tank. What next, though?
Why is the effluent level so high?
That's a great question. How do we answer it?
Bed's filled.
Pardon?
The bed is filled.
The bed may be filled. The bed may just be blocked. You could have a distribution box that's blocked.
Consider
You could have a header that's out of level, and only a third of the leaching field's been getting water for 18 years. So a lot of different answers to that question, but you're right, you have to ask the question, why does it look like that? Pumping the tank isn't the solution. It's the first step. So on-site sewage maintenance inspections, we'll need a procedure or best practice guidance document. That'd be a great thing to have, and it needs to be provincial, right? That'd be a great resource to have. Would have been great to have that 10, 15 years ago. It needs to be compliance with section 8.9 of the Ontario Building Code, which is related to operation and maintenance. So it means that this inspection protocol doesn't have to bring all systems into compliance with current standards, but they have to be in compliance with section 8.9, which is operation and maintenance. It should be utilized in my view, for all mandatory programs with consistency, which we've already talked about, but it definitely has to be used for real estate transactions. And it has to be used all the way through phase 1 and phase 2 for real estate transactions. Why would that be? Risk mitigation. If you get called into court for something that went wrong later, and the lawyer for the person against you says, is there a protocol in the province of Ontario, the jurisdiction you're working in, that describes how to do a maintenance inspection? Say, yeah, it's an appendix note to the building code. It lists a progressive audit approach of phase 1 and phase 2, and it describes which elements should be done in which order, and how to do the documentation. If you do not do that to the letter of that procedure, you're going to be asked why. It's going to call your professionalism into question, your judgment into question. What did you cut out and why did you cut it out? If the province says this is the gold standard, was that client and that property not worth the gold standard to do that work? Why did you choose not to do it? Well, the answer is going to be, it's going to cost too much, or it wasn't going to be easy. Well, get the checkbook out. That's how I operate for real estate transactions. So I was so thankful that the province came out with this document in 2011. It gave me a procedure that I could use and I could stand on as long as we had the qualifications and we did the work with the diligence required to provide a good report to the client. So I would caution you, if you're doing less than this, explain why. Because later, if I'm on that property for a real estate transaction and the system doesn't work, and there's major obvious deficiencies, and the people don't have any money, who do you think they're coming after? It's not going to be me, because I'm very conservative with my report. Guess who's going to be on the stand having this same speech in court? Me. I'll be the greatest expert witness in history. And I'll say, I got all your names, I know they were here, I told them. I'm just kidding. So this is a great document, memorize it. It could help you both in your professional life now, but it could help you in the future if you decide to go into the private sector, because there are going to be more inspections required than there are people qualified to do them. The people that have the best qualifications and understand the law and design well enough are people probably in this room. There's other practitioners that will understand it, but just be aware that you need to follow a procedure in order to provide the services you need. Some context. Within that procedure, and I'm going to go through each section of phase 1, phase 2. For the first part, it says an inventory. I'm going to talk about a visual inspection. Your programs that were all described to me earlier today, very much, with the exception of the pump outs, which we'll talk about in a moment, very much sound like a field survey and building an inventory. They sound very little like an inspection to me. So call it what you want. I'm telling you what I think it is. It's not an inspection if you don't look in the tank. If you don't inspect the system while it's being operated, the way they had been operating it, not the way that they repaired it a week ago, then that's not an inspection, you're at risk. So the inspection programs you put together, they're great inventories. They're great field surveys. They help us with our risk assessment. You know there's a system on that property. But it doesn't necessarily constitute a phase 1 inspection, because I'll go through phase 1, and I didn't hear much about completing all of phase 1. So you have to tell me which parts you took out and why. You don't need to tell me that here, but. And I heard a lot about cost. Pay now or pay later. Someone's going to pay for that system to get replaced because it needs to get replaced. Just don't make it you. So these two, walk around, that's fine. We know it's there. The one on the left, there's a septic tank out front. I can GPS it, that's great. There's clay lines in the ground. The one on the right, this is a winter inspection. What do you see in the bottom? This thing doesn't work. The bottom right there, that corner. What do you see? Why is there snow melting at the end of the line? So whoever told me you can't do inspections in the winter, I'll tell you right now, it's easier to do inspections in the winter. You find all the failures. Less risk for me. The snow melts where there's sewage coming to the ground surface. You have bulrushes growing in the middle of the yard in February. It's easier to get into tanks if the house is in use, because the tank stays warm enough to melt the ground above it. So you put a probe through the first 2 inches and you're going straight to the tank. So I go, nope, nope, nope. Well, there's a tank. It's easier to find a septic tank in the winter if the house is occupied. So get rid of some of these misconceptions about what makes it easy to do within your programs. It's not necessarily right for real estate transactions. So I don't want people to say, no, you can't do septic inspections in the winter. I prefer to do them in the winter because I'm going to find the problems. If a system's failing to release wastewater into the environment, it's most likely going to happen when the ground above the system is frozen and it no longer has evapotranspiration. How many days of the year does a septic system need to function? How many days are in the year? So you can't say I'm not doing it in the winter because I don't know if everything's working right. Hogwash, or another word I might use. Garbage, they have to work year round. So you should be able to inspect it year round to determine compliance with that system. There's some contingencies, but I'm not going to set up my program based on what could possibly happen and what I don't want to do. So progressive audit approach, this still works. The visual inspection still works. I would have identified both of these things on a visual inspection. Maybe not the one on the right where the dye's going into the creek, but definitely the one on the left. Is there appear to be a problem there? He told me that groundhog problems. Because he felt that that was the problem. They had no groundhogs there. Is that system on the left on visual inspection? I would subject that to a phase 1 inspection, meaning I need to look in the tank. But I call it a visual inspection, an inventory, a field survey, and then you get into the inspections. Phase 1 has a specific meaning to me, and there's a very different meaning to every other person that came up here and presented. I heard one person say that phase 2 involved enforcement. So, out of a 7-page document, we all have very different interpretations. It doesn't surprise me that the consistency of the application of the actual building code is so different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, because we don't have these opportunities to talk about how to do it. This maintenance inspection procedure is 7 pages long, and we all got different interpretations of it. Based on our needs, yes. Well. So, phase 1, what's the purpose? Obtain the most recent information on the system, as well as the size of the building, number of fixtures, and bedrooms that is servicing it. Phase 1, the purpose is to find out the sewage flow. It says it right there. So if anybody says they're not interested in bedrooms or fixtures or square footage, it says it right in the procedure you need to stand on in court. Don't let that trip you up. Locate the system's components. Identify any obvious or outward signs. In our reports, we call them overt signs of malfunction, just to make it dressed up. There's shit on the ground. Identify systems that are at risk of malfunction or failure. That is so ambiguous, I love it. What's at risk mean of failure? What does that mean? Let's think about a car, because we all drive, right? Is an older car more at risk of breaking down than a brand new car? I don't want to get into the Ford argument, but anyway. Is an older car more at risk than a brand new car? Is it more at risk? So can a system be at risk just based on its age? What about construction materials? What about its design and the design flow? All of those are factors that should inform your risk of the system's failure. So the purpose of phase 1 is to identify systems that are at risk of malfunction or failure. So if you're not going to get into the tank and get into the system, you better do a calculation of design flow against the original permit or against the size of the system that they were reported to have there. It's a risk mitigation strategy done from your desk. You don't need to be on site to do that. They can report it, do a calculation. You do it for designs anyway. But that last caption is the one that allows you to mitigate your risk. You can be ultra conservative and say, based on the age, design, construction, location, and reported use of this system, it's potentially at risk for failure. Therefore, I want a phase 1 inspection done on that. Open the tank, look inside. Somebody said earlier, just because a system is old doesn't mean it's going to fail. I agree, but it's at greater risk. And if I'm trying to keep my ass out of court, I'm going to identify it. Most recent information available for the system. Diagram from the homeowner. Guess what that says? When we put the pool in, we got rid of those lines on that side, and we just extended the lines on this side down and around the pool. That's as useful a document to me as any permit. When we do real estate inspections, I could care less about what's on file. It informs us as any other piece of information, but not any more or any less. So if you got a stack full of permits from 1972 through 1980 that you're going to go around verifying compliance with, I'll see you in court. How many systems are still in the exact same condition and the entire environment around the system is identical to what it was when it was installed? Trees, patios, decks, all those other things. So a permit informs the inspection, but it's not the inspection. I'll qualify again, in a real estate transaction. other purposes, I'm just giving you my context, so you don't leave. So the phase 1 maintenance inspection generally avoids significant disturbance in the system. During the course of phase 1 maintenance inspection, the inspector would have normally identified the type of occupancy that determines the source and type of sanitary sewage. How many people are going to live there? How many people did live there? Easy question to ask. You don't need to be on site to do it. The source of the water supply. The approximate volume of sewage generated. So, how would you do that? That's an actual question as opposed to a rhetorical question. How would you do that? Would you use the design flow calculations based on the year the system was reportedly put in? Or would you use today's design flow calculations? Which one do you think is more conservative? Today's design flow calculations are more conservative. So you're going to report design flow? I would use today's. So you can report that the system is potentially under capacity because the design flow is whatever it is. The use of special devices such as garbage dryers or water softeners, and the general nature of the system, class components, type layout, etc. This is all as of phase 1. It's a lot of good information. Location system components respects the well, surface water, and other environmental features. That you can collect on site without being intrusive. The approximate level of groundwater. This is in phase 1. How have you guys all identified how you're going to deal with this caption in terms of your programs? From the report. Yeah.
We've got a fair enough amount of new systems have gone in most of the areas to go back and look at the test well inspections in the surrounding areas. Not completely accurate, but gives you a ballpark.
Okay, so for the more recently installed, in my view, less risky sites, you would have better information.
Correct, perhaps 3 doors down from the site that has no record or a 1967 record. Not 100% accurate, but gives you
More data is better than less data. I'm not going to hang my hat on 3 doors down,
No,
but it does give you more. That's good. Anybody else dealing with groundwater heights on a property in terms of their phase 1? This is phase 1. It says hand augering at the bottom. That sounds intrusive, right? I thought this was a non-intrusive thing, but it's in there. You'd have to defend why you didn't do it because it's in phase 1. So if you're going to extract certain elements of this, tell me why. The size, material, and the condition of the septic tank or the holding tank. How are you going to do that if you didn't look inside of it? Just from the records? Condition? The condition of the tank when it was installed? You can't do that without looking inside. This is phase 1. The frequency of tank pump out and the last time the tank was cleaned. And note that in this procedure, a septic tank pump out is not a suggested activity under a phase 1 inspection. In my view, I do not want the tank pumped out before I do my inspection. It puts me at risk. You can pump 2,500 gallons out of an 800-gallon tank. And then you show up and say everything's fine, and you got a discharge bath, an effluent filter, everything's great, but the bed's pooched. To borrow a phrase that made a lot of sense. I think I've used that before. A tank pump out as a component of a phase 1 limits the template for good inspections by good inspectors to the cost of the pump outs, which are going to go up. The availability of septic disposal sites across the province is shrinking, not expanding. If you want to hang all the good that comes from this inspection program on mandatory haulage of sewage, you're increasing the carbon footprint of the program, and it's unnecessary, and I don't think legally you could do it. Because if you came to me and said, you're pumping your tank, I'd say, measure the scum and sludge. And if it doesn't match up, I'm not doing it. So we talked earlier about your legal ability to force people to do stuff. I don't think it qualifies. Why would you hang your hat on pump outs? You have the same person there, probably the pumper or another contractor, that can do all of the other measurements, can inspect things, can look at bathroom condition, but I don't have the cost of septic disposal, potentially unnecessarily. The pumpers are going to do awesome, and after today, I am buying pumper trucks. I don't know the pumper truck, but I'm going to start buying them because everybody thinks a pump out is the magical panacea to how we do septic system maintenance. It is not. It's a component of maintenance. It is not maintenance itself. So be careful with that. And it's not a maintenance inspection. I'm also pretty concerned that we're hanging our pumpers out to dry. It's their BCIN number on it. It's them commenting on all the stuff that the inspection entails. So if somebody's going to get sued, they're on that list for the cost of a pump out. Be careful what you make your pumpers do and comment on it. It's not fair to them. Do you know that all your pumpers have errors in emissions insurance to provide commentary on a system? Are they qualified to do that with their BCIN? I don't think so. Your BCIN means you can navigate the code. Doesn't mean you know know how to inspect septic systems. That's not part of the training. I know that because there's no training on that. So be careful what you're hanging your pumpers out to dry on here. They will get a pump out, don't kid yourself. But people are aware that it's part of a maintenance procedure and they're aware of how their system functions. Pumper's gonna be there, but don't hang the liability on that. It's not fair. Or, it's the only option you have. I'm suggesting that it's not. And if people look to Lake Simcoe, the Source Water Protection Plan, and Central Ontario as a template for how we should run maintenance inspection procedures across the province, I'm fearful that people will think a pump out is a required component after hearing everybody speak here today. You need to look in the tank. You need to take measurements. You need to determine if a pump out is necessary. But we are going to bottleneck our entire industry if everybody's hauling waste unnecessarily. There's nowhere in the building code that says 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. There is a measurement, so take the measurement. I'm not going to beat that to death anymore, but if you guys want to continue the path you're on, I think shares and pumper trucks are the right way to go. But I really think they're going to be challenged and they're going to hate you for it because they won't be able to supply the service because there will not be receiving sites available at the time frames for the necessary pump outs. And they're going to be doing so many inspection pump outs, they won't be available for emergency pump outs when we actually have stuff discharging the ground surface. So be careful. Yep.
How do you inspect the condition of a tank if the effluent is as full as the one in the picture? How do you provide comment on the condition of the inside of the tank?
I'll give you an analogy. Somebody hands me a bucket full of water. I don't dump the bucket out to look for a hole in the bucket. All of the damage to a concrete septic tank happens due to the gas phase above the water line. The fluid is protective of the material unless you have some protrusion like tree roots, in which case there will be a crack in the tank and the liquid level will be lower than normal. I want to know scum and sludge levels that shows the respect or lack thereof that the homeowner was providing for that system. If I have 30 centimeters of sludge and I have 15 centimeters of scum, I basically have a pipe from the inlet to the discharge and the bed is going to be eventually pooched. I don't know that if I didn't get to see the scum and sludge measurements. Therefore, I'm at risk of replacing the bed. The tank is there to protect the bed. Septic tank's not a septic system, it's a tank. It's the simplest component, it's a sump with anaerobic treatment. The bed's the expensive investment. So I want to know if they've been using the tank to protect the bed. So I'll show you some pictures of what the tanks look like, but I want to see the system as they're using it. You're going to buy a car and somebody says, yeah, I got the oil change last week. When did you get a change before that? I don't recall. I don't think I've ever done it. Nobody forced me to. You going to buy that car? I've never done an oil change on it. So inspecting a septic system that just recently had a septic tank pump out makes everybody vulnerable. And in my view, it's unnecessary. Because I don't want to pump. Yeah. So phase one, any indication of sewage system failure, including evidence of backup of effluent. That could be scum or sludge that has impacted the top of the tank, so you can see it. It's hanging on the discharge baffle or the inlet baffle. It means the effluent level has risen for some reason. Or it's high in the pump chamber. If you have sludge somewhere in that system across the vertical profile that it shouldn't be, at some point there has been a problem with that system. So you can determine effluent backup. Signs of hydraulic failure, breakout of sewage, wetting conditions in the leaching bed area, the condition of surface vegetation and odor problems. So people are highlighting in phase one that that's what they're looking at. This isn't phase one on its own, it's just J. Odor problems, condition of surface vegetation. It's the easy part, I get that, but anybody can do that. Documentation of previous effluent sampling test results where required. Under 8.4. This is based on the type of dispersal, not necessarily type of unit. I'm going to caution you. Does anybody here have a microbiology degree? I'm sure there's somebody. Anybody know what BOD5 and TSS really represent? Do you know what those numbers mean? What if it came in at 30-30? Do you care? Is it unsafe? So, for a different day, be very careful with your interpretation of sample results. You're measuring a grab sample against a 30-day average on a test site. Don't proliferate ignorance by demanding that they reach it. Be reasonable. The best way to be reasonable is to be informed. Find out from manufacturer suppliers and the B&Q and NSF what those sample results mean. And if you haven't done that and you're judging system performance based on a grab sample, who took the sample? What were the conditions? You're basically going to do a whole inspection like I'm describing before you can compare the results in context to what they should be. So be careful with sample results. I think they're bogus. Unless you're going to take a sample of influent and effluent like we do under the MOE, what percentage reduction are we doing? Unless you're doing that, just relying on effluent samples on the discharge end is a mistake. The labs make a ton of money, and I make a ton of money sampling, and you're throwing money away. I want them to do the maintenance. Make sure the air pump works. Make sure you don't unplug it. Who cares about the sample results? I will use sample results to force them to fix systems if they're obviously not compliant. But what's the difference, in your mind, what's the difference between a sample that says 15 BOD and one that says 30? Danger? What if it's coming out of the septic tank at 550? Just be cautious with sample results, because it's in there. You're going to be following this little letter of the law, so just be cautious with it. So phase 2, that was all phase 1. I think there was a lot more in there than what was described in some of the other programs we heard. So phase 1 would inform phase 2. I'm thinking that phase 2, some of these elements really should have been in phase 1 anyway. So the phase 1 maintenance inspection has identified that the septic system is at risk of future malfunction or failure. At risk of future malfunction or failure. Aren't we all just going to die? It's like saying you're at risk of dying. When? I don't know, eventually. There's a risk. How do you describe that risk, and how do you say it had none? I said everything was okay. What criteria did you use? The phase 1 inspection detected a malfunction or failure, but did not reveal the reason of the malfunction or failure. So you need to dig a little deeper, quite literally. So this is where we start talking about the septic tank in phase 2. Okay. Depth of sludge layer, distance from the top of the sludge layer, scum levels, the T, distance between the top of the scum layer and the bottom of the T, blah, blah, blah. This is all the stuff you have on your pumper report. So you're making them do phase 2. So you are doing phase 1 and phase 2. It's just somebody else is doing phase 2. I have no trouble with that. Just don't make them haul the sewage outside if it's not necessary. If you use treatment systems, the existence of a maintenance agreement and the date of last servicing, I think that's misguided. Shouldn't that be in the survey, field test, phase 1 part? This is a paper chase, right? Do you have a maintenance report? Do you have a maintenance contract? That's all part of, in my view, should be part of phase 1. Test results of a new round of effluent sampling and operational problems or system malfunction before at the time of inspection. Has everybody here inspected an in-use tertiary treatment unit on the market? Has anybody done that? Well, you have. Have you inspected any that worked? I've inspected a lot of these systems, and I'll tell you, it's very difficult to train people because of the subtleties to it. Some of them look horrendous when you open the lid. But that's how they're supposed to look. They're retaining the solids, creating scum, and digesting that stuff, and retaining it in the tank for further digestion, so the clarified effluent can go to the dispersal bed. If you haven't inspected them, how are you going to do a phase 2 inspection if you're not prepared for that? So the manufacturers that have been selling for the last 13, 25 years in Ontario should become your best friends to provide manuals on how to do inspections of their systems and what things should look like. Here's one, an aerobic treatment unit, 30 years old. I'm there because this is an MOE-regulated drinking water system, so we're looking for sources of risk. So what are those over there? They look like little kid sandboxes, so you keep the cats out of them. So they put the lid on, right? You open it up, and like, whoa, what is that? That's our treatment unit. So really, does it have any function you're aware of? Yeah, it just works as a septic tank. We have 2 of them in a row. So really, because there's a 10,000-gallon septic tank up the hill there. What does it do? Well, it also works as a septic tank. How are they connected? I don't know. No electrical at all. Going to this. No blower. There's no electrical going to it. How did this fall off the radar? And what do you do about it? You're going to find these. You're going to find a whole bunch of different systems that are abandoned. We call them orphaned. I also call them opportunities. But I think of people as clients as opposed to ratepayers. So it's different. You're going to inspect this system. Do you understand all the elements and the different configurations? How do we deal with it? And if I seem like I'm argumentative a bit, it's because we got blasted for third-party inspections earlier today. Guess what I do for a living? So, you guys do the first function. Bioswitch treatment system. What does this do? Do you realize there's a whole bunch of chopped up plastic in the second tank? Is it supposed to look like that? How are you gonna know? I'm not sending a summer student to do that. I'll just hit that real quick. We have, I think, 5 inspectors at our office. You don't get to go on an inspection site unless you've been working there for 3 years on inspections and on maintenance. You're not going anywhere near something that could put us out of business if we get sued. Not on money, on reputation. It's not an entry-level job to do inspections or real estate inspections or any type of re-inspections. It's an entry-level job to do a field survey. Where in your sewer system's distribution boxes, dosing tanks and pump chambers may be inspected to determine their condition and functionality. There's a D-box. Do you know how you know there's a D-box on the property that doesn't have a permit? Magic, obviously. Magic. We use a camera. You go from the discharge end of the septic tank out to the header or the D-box. You find a D-box and you're like, holy, there's a D-box there. Thank God we caught that one. Because this one could cost us $1,500 in work and labor to replace. Guess what happens if we miss something? We replace it at our cost. Does anybody here know what small claims court is worth? You know the minimum, like the maximum you can sue for in a small claims court with the lawyers?
25.
That's scary. No lawyers involved. Guess who also gets sued in small claims court? Municipalities. Guess who's replacing these septic systems if you miss this? Not just that, the whole thing. Pump chambers. What if the bed's plugged and everything's backed up because the electrical is no good because the junction box without the cap is in the pump chamber and it's completely soaked? Who did the inspection on that? Well, if I'm there, I did the inspection on that. The report better identify that that's a problem and how to resolve it. Because those pumps are going to fail if they're not failing intermittently now due to corrosion on the wires. This is an inspection. You're going to see more of this because you have to be above the water table, so a lot of systems have pumps now. More pump chambers. That's gorgeous. You're looking down now. I don't know, I saw that picture before about people going in tanks. Oh yeah, yeah. You shouldn't ever have to enter any part of a septic system to inspect it. And if you're working for somebody right now that makes you do that, I want to know what you get paid and how level it. Come work for me. But the discharge on this, what's the vulnerability on that discharge? How do you get the pump out? But you're gonna have to, it's hard plumbed in. You need a hacksaw, right? And a union, and then somebody else can deal with it later. Inspection and lease events may also consider clearance distances to environmental features, wells, soil type and its permeability in the vicinity of the bed is what we described rather than under the bed because you can't know that. Evidence of ponding, encroachments in the leaching bed, buildings, additions, patios, driveways, pools. That's a big one that you can identify in your field survey from phase 2, right? The general location of the bed and stuff that's on top of it. So it's available to you without digging in the tank, right? Trees and deep rooting shrubs in the vicinity of the bed. That's an easy one too. How close do they need to be before they're in the vicinity? Well, that's up to you based on the risk that you're willing to carry. There's some trees in the general area of that bed that are 30-year-old spruces. That is the bed in between all those spruce trees. Guess what's coming up with this side? So this one got caught up in the visual inspection. Yeah, we didn't have to look in the tank, but when we did, guess what we found? That was the original picture with the yellow screen on the side with the septic tank effluent coming out the top of the tank at the bottom of the stairs. That was that picture of that house. We passed it because I didn't want to cost them any money. We told them, get it pumped out, don't worry about it. You don't have any money, do you? We don't have any government grants to cover this. You shouldn't have to worry about it.
You don't deal with politicians, do you?
I am a politician. We gotta say it the way it is.
Oh, I do.
And no, in my position with real estate transactions, I have to say what it is, otherwise I'm replacing that system.
Right.
So, politicians and ratepayers, it's not, I'll tell you, and somebody hit it earlier, that the rich people also apply for grants.
Absolutely.
Because you don't get rich by spending money. And if you're poor, and you can't afford it, it might not be that you can't afford it, it's that you don't want to spend the money you have on that. That's not the same thing as not being able to afford it. It's a priority system. It's not pretty, it's a septic system, but it's part of your sewage infrastructure. You can't live here without it. Sell the car. Buy a cheaper one. I don't care. If we're all hinging our jobs on satisfying the pocketbook of people in Ontario, then maybe you guys should be the politicians. We have to fix these things. It costs money to do that. It doesn't have to come from the government. It has to come from the property owner. If they have to budget for it, boo-hoo. I'm not a business if I can't pay my bills. Somebody's going to help them, but it doesn't have to be the government. So don't judge the systems based on available grants. It will always run out. And then you're always going to leave somebody on the outside looking in. So let's tell them what they have to do, not what we think they want to do based on their pocket. Blockages in the leaching bed and pollution sources may be identified. Evaluation of air plumbing and estimates of water usage. Conducting leak diagnostics. What does that mean? Conducting a flow trial, a dye tracing test, and excavating a cross-section of the leaching bin. The one I exclude on our phase 1, phase 2 approach is excavating a cross-section of the leaching field. The reason is, my client in the real estate transaction is always the purchaser. So bringing a backhoe and digging a cross-section across somebody else's property doesn't fit within the scope of work that the vendor will sign off on. But we have advised people that it's necessary for them to inform themselves based on our phase 1, phase 2, in order to determine what they may be able to remediate, fix, or replace. So it does happen. I'll show some pictures. But I will exclude the very last point. We will not do that as part of our standard phase 1, phase 2. And we always do phase 1 and phase 2 together.
You do dye tests, right?
Yeah.
On all inspections?
Yep. We do a camera inspection on all inspections. We dig up the septic tanks ourselves, and the distribution box, and the pump chambers on all inspections ourselves. Every time. I'll take questions now. Go ahead.
How long does it take you to do that inspection the way you do it, from start to finish, from the time you're on site?
Yeah, if they're not on site in 3 hours, there's probably some mitigating circumstances. So 3 hours on site is what we've allotted to do those. Site unseen, no permits, no homeowner on site. Completely just us investigating. No information at all. We don't know anything about the site, and sometimes we don't want any. We want to supply to us after we've started doing the inspections so we can see if we're right or not.
How many people?
How many people involved? Typically one.
One, two.
I push hard, but I pay well. You guys they're so good at this. They have so much experience doing it. You know why? They don't get on a job site unless they've done it with somebody else for 3 years. They know what they're doing. So you can't really see that, but fixture connections. See a problem on the left there. If you didn't go in the house, you wouldn't know that all their laundry goes to the sump pit. All of it. They just disconnected it. Do you know why? Septic tank can't handle it. It backs up. So we just start diverting water away from the system as it stops being able to handle it. So if you're not looking at that, you're in trouble. The one on the right there, and this isn't really related to the septic, but cast iron pipes corrode from the inside. They get smaller and smaller and smaller. So we have to comment to them, so I don't get a call back later, that the toilets won't flush. You know why? There's a G.I. Joe man wrapped in toilet paper stuck in that cast iron pipe with no cleanout, except in the septic tank. So fixture connections. What's connected? What isn't? You also know that the plumbing's been upgraded from original there, right? By looking at that. 2 materials, the cast iron discharge and the ABS above it. Why is that? Did they put another bathroom in? Put a new kitchen in? Put more fixtures in? Some questions you should ask. In the foundation drainage system, we put a tracer dye. Do you know how it ended up in the foundation drainage? We only put dye into a toilet. You flush it, it goes into the septic tank, if it makes it there, and ends up back in the foundation drainage system. 2 different routes that typically happen. The tank will settle and cleave the line from the foundation into the tank, and it'll be set down lower, and it'll drain back into the foundation drainage system, because there's only, in a lot of cases, 1.5 meters to the tank. Sometimes that is connected properly, but every time it's backed up, they dug it up and got a pump. They dug it up so much, the soil is so disturbed, the water comes up from the top of the tank and comes through the disturbed soil around the top of the tank, back into the foundation drainage system. If you hadn't done this, you wouldn't realize they're discharging that to the other side of the house into the drainage ditch. So if you don't go in the house and didn't do a dye test, you would have missed that. The bed might be working fine because we're diverting it all past the bed. This is a simple one. We did ask them to excavate a cross-section on this one because there was water in the line from the septic tank out to the distribution laterals, but it was out about 6 feet, I think. So you wouldn't have seen it from the tank. Tank levels were normal. But 6 feet out with the camera, we find the water has completely filled the pipe. And this isn't a perforated pipe. This is a pipe that transmits water to perforated lines to disperse into the soil. So if you find water in any lateral line, it means there's a problem downstream of that. So we said, we don't know what the problem is. You're going to have to excavate it. So there's your cross section. Look what we found. Extra lines of gravel that are also saturated. This system had failed 15 years ago, and they had done their best to repair it without a permit. But I'm not signing off on that, and a visual inspection would have passed it. If somebody moves into that house with 5 people, and you have an inspection report that says that system works, guess who's replacing it? Because I actually get probably Eric's firm to come forensic engineer behind me and say, I don't know what Rick's talking about. All you had to do is dig a cross section. It's in point J from phase 2 of the provincial protocol. Why didn't you dig it up, Rick? And I'm like, I don't know, I'll get my check. So be careful. Inspection reports we talked about a bit. The quality report for real estate transactions should be subject such that you could submit it to the chief building official and satisfy all their dreams about what a report should say. That's the quality it should be to supply to a client. It should be better than anybody else produces. More information is better than less. And hopefully in the future, maybe you could register an inspection report against the title, and that would satisfy the requirement for a maintenance inspection.
Under what authority would you register it against title? Register after someone's an authority.
I told you I'm a politician, I'm just going to create a provincial law.
Okay.
That's how that works, eh? That's how they do it. I used to think it went into a black box and came out the other side, but they just waved their hand. There's the potential that that could help. Did you know that the recommendation number 9 from the O'Connor inquiry in the Washington report is that all on-site systems should have an inspection completed at the time of property sale? It's the only one they didn't actually do. I hurt my business plan, but anyway, I'm not. But there's a potential it has to have that quality, so if you were to look at it, you would respect that it qualified all the phase 1 and phase 2 elements you would be looking for, with the exception of a pump out, which won't happen on these kind of reports. So, we're going to go through some pictures. We'll talk about, or show you how it's not easy, but you gotta do it. You have to locate septic tanks. Sometimes they have a rock garden and trees on top of it. Sometimes they just put a deck on top of it. If you're lucky, with 3.5 feet above, not 2.5 feet above the deck. Yeah, there's access. How do you get there? Well, you go under there. Is that access? What's access to? Are you going to allow a building permit for a deck that's 36 inches, 24 inches, 10 inches above the septic tank? What are you talking about? Put an access port on it? What does that mean? You and I should go for beers sometime. I'm also a health inspector, so I can appreciate getting out there. Yeah. No, the idea on access is it has to be accessible for inspection and maintenance, right? It has to be reasonable. So just try to be reasonable about what you advise people they can do. Access to the one on the left is actually harder. At least the one has sand underneath it. The other one has tree roots all over everything and rocks on top. Very challenging to get access to. Year round, the one on the right was at least 3 or 4 feet below grade. You can still dig it up in the winter. We located and dug it up in the wintertime. Below a tree. At 3 feet. And the one on the, when I say we, somebody else that works for me did that. The one on the left, if everything is beach sand, how do you find the septic tank with nobody telling you where it is? Just use a probe and walk around for a while. You only get 3 hours, it's possible. Getting into the septic tank, variety of different lids. They're not uniform. Some of them are slide off the whole end of the tank. Some of them have no lids. None. We made that tank in 1935. Last time we replaced it, we just put a solid lid on top. Okay. More getting into septic tanks. This one, like this is probably raised inspection to the back. They didn't know that there was another lid there. They had access over the inlet, but the discharge they didn't know existed. Do you see how deep that is? How are you going to inspect the discharge baffle? And one point that I have to make, the majority of the damage to a concrete septic tank due to corrosion is in the concrete above the discharge baffle on the discharge end of the tank. So because that's where the majority of the anaerobic gases, hydrogen sulfide and methane, will be trapped because they are very difficult to vent across the entire profile of the tank and back up to the vent stack. So if you have only one point to inspect in a septic tank, I'll tell you that's it. The discharge baffle and the concrete around that. If you can't get access to the inlet, I'll take that. Try to take a picture backwards underneath. But you need to see the discharge end of the tank, the baffle condition, and the concrete. You find that one. Good luck. Patio stones on the entrance. More importantly, how do you put it back so it looks the same? Looking down there, can you spot the septic tank lid? It's camouflage, but it does have a lid on it, or sorry, a strap on it. Again, good luck. People put stamped concrete patios on top of their septic systems. That's a tough conversation to have. So that costs 15 grand. You need to take that. Because I can't inspect a septic tank, and no one else can else we can. That's a lovely one too. Getting a little bit easier. But see how they're far apart and they're round lids, not typical. So septic tank access risers are good news for future maintenance and inspection. If you don't have to dig up the tank and has access, most of phase 1 and phase 2 can all be done readily by any inspector. You don't have to have somebody that's articulate, knows the building code, knows biological treatment, and is really good at the show and masonry work. That's a tough combination of factors, so my hiring process is very challenging. If you have access risers to grade, it makes it easier for students or inspectors to inspect for maintenance procedures in the future. It's in the building code now. In a perfect world, if I did have that political magic, I'd tell people, you want to institute a meaningful bylaw? Institute a bylaw that forces over a phased-in period that everybody has to have access to all the low-grade components that need any access in the future for maintenance or inspection. Why not? Why not truncate it back to just the septic tank has to have access risers to within 3 inches of grade? Then the homeowner's supposed to do it. If you're going to dig up some of these 4 feet deep ones, why would you do it more than once? Do it once. But it's in the building code now, and as we renew them, more and more we'll put in access risers. So in-use conditions, we talked earlier about how to inspect that, right? I want to see what that looks like. So the effluent level is right below the discharge pipe in static water level. It's right below. As you add water in, it'll come up. If it's below that level, I have a problem with that tank. And I'm talking incremental. It only has to be an inch below. The water level only has to be an inch below the discharge pipe, and I have a problem with that tank. That's it. That's art. That's beautiful. From one end of the tank to the other with the halo coming down around me, destroying the discharge end of that tank. You know something? Fermentation bubbles. What don't you see? Scum. Where is it?
On the lid.
There's some there, but there's none on the top of the surface of that water. Either the tank has been dead or the scum just travels out with the water around the broken tank and in and around the... If you don't see any scum in a tank, you got a problem. It doesn't mean the tank's healthy. You're going to have varying levels of scum at different times of the year. I don't know why I ever want to become an expert in that, but... In the summer, you're going to have more scum. In the winter, you have less because of environmental conditions. The airflow will cool things off and the mold doesn't grow as fast. Typical problem, concrete corrosion and that shield baffle has pulled away. There was no scum in this because it just goes around the baffle and out and plugs the lines. Again, discharge into the tank. This is one with a buried effluent filter. This would be one that could get missed in a 5-year cycle if we leave the ones that are only 5 years old. Because they buried the discharge end, because nobody informed the homeowner that there was any maintenance required, that there was a filter in this. If they had a backup in there, do you know who gets sued? The installer for sure. I know some guys are pretty strong, but if you could put a 3/8-inch steel rod through concrete, the tank needs to be replaced. You can't tell that unless you have access to the discharge end of the tank. But if that collapses after you've been there and you didn't see it, you're on the hook for it. Again, in a real estate transaction, because we're hired to do exactly this. Again, we have the shield coming away. Why is the shield coming away? Because all the corrosion is above the water line, eating away the concrete, in particular eating away the set screws that go into the tank. So they eat away first and it pulls away. And then all the scum goes around the outside and transmits out into the field with the effluent during regular fill. What's the solution to this problem? Install a filter. What do you do with the stuff that's already out in the bed?
Pardon?
What do you do with the stuff that's already out in the bed? Because you don't know how long it's been like that. At a minimum, you're flushing the bed out and you may be replacing it. Seems pretty harsh, right? That's the reality of it. That discharge baffle is there to keep floating solids sequestered in that tank so they don't plug the lines. Again, concrete corrosion. This is a beautiful septic tank in use. A little bit of a retrofit, but it's a block tank. It's more like a leaching pit, but they have black water going to it. In use conditions. If they had pumped that a week before I was there, I wouldn't see that that's how much respect they have for the function of their septic system. You know the problem when you don't pump the tank for long periods of time? The scum layer restricts the flow of gases that attack concrete from exiting the tank. So they stay in the tank, particularly at the discharge end, and they eat the tank. They eat concrete. If you're pulling up the discharge end of the tank, you could end up with the lid in 2 halves, because it's 3/4 of an inch thick. See the discharge baffle way down in there? Can you see on the black staining there that this has obviously come up repeatedly? What's wrong with this system? We don't know. We better get it pumped out and we better look in further into the downstream conditions, right? This could be as simple as it has a distribution box that's completely plugged with solids. Or the D box has collapsed. So further investigation. This is a homemade concrete block tank with a steel girder in it. So we have some specialty tools that we use to mitigate our risk. There's a locator, there's a transmitter, there's a sewer inspection camera with a transmitter in it and a light, and it takes video and pictures. You can show them at cocktail parties, people are press. We used to do inspections. I did inspections for about 5 years for real estate transactions without a camera. And after we bought the camera, I couldn't sleep for a couple of weeks over what I probably missed from not having used the camera myself. I was scared, particularly as it relates to, it goes out of the tank and makes a right into Big O and goes to the neighbor's place. You never found it because it goes 250 feet to the neighbor's place. Sometimes people will bypass and go right through their neighbor's entire property to a discharge point on the other side of another property, but they had an agreement at the time that that was okay because he couldn't afford to replace it. The camera will find that. Be careful. But that's all phase 2 stuff, right? So this is what it looks like when you put it out. This is what it looks like inside. What do you see on the midway on the right there? Tree roots. And you see it's at the 12-foot mark. There's not water accumulating, but eventually those tree roots are going to clog that, right? What do you see there? The 22-foot mark. The header. So we can mark the header with the transmitter and we can go out and find it. If that were a D box, you'd find the D box. Because there's a transmitter. And I have a picture of what it looks like. I have no idea what the stuff on the top is. What do you see down that pipe? Daylight? Tough life, man. That's not daylight. That's the sludge that has come off the concrete into the tank and out the pipe. It's going to plug that. That's at 53 feet out. So eventually it's going to create a restriction that would require repair. Doesn't mean the beds fail, but at least you're identifying them. So I'll show you some, we'll call them FUBAR pictures, but concrete corrosion. This is a system that had a check plate on top of it. So be careful walking on people's properties. What they're familiar with, you may not see as a hazard, and they know not to step there. Well, if they're not there, be very careful. There's a plastic tank. I remember I said earlier about new solutions becoming new problems. This is homeowner installed. He didn't really understand the concept of the height of the effluent level and what a baffle was. So he maximized the volume in the tank. I think Romy Biofilter actually patented this after it called a tube, right? Whatever that was. Where there's no airspace at all. But what that means is any of the floating scum is out in the bed. On the left there, we had a former above ground pool right on top of the leaching field. On the right side there, we have people that don't respect what they should be flushing, and now we're not seeing as much of this because it's completely covered in pre-moistened adult wipes. You want to see something screw up a septic system or a municipal system, flush those wipes. So we talked about fixture connections, things that are connected that maybe weren't originally. This is dye coming to the ground surface. I already knew that it was sewage, I just want to prove that it was sewage, so we put dye down the toilet, it flushed the system and ended up there. That's pretty unequivocal. It's not just a sump discharge. They had severed this property off, hadn't really done a good assessment of the location of the leaching field, and the adjacent property became a horse paddock and it crushed the bed, just compacted the bed. So this is the point that it came from. Similar thing on a severance here. They severed it off and then the farmer used the field until he couldn't drive there anymore. You know the big difference here, why the system failed? They put a weeping towel around the interior of their basement, and the best discharge point for year-round discharge of foundation drainage water was the septic system. It's not just for older systems. This is a new system with access risers to grade and an effluent filter, but the effluent filter hadn't been maintained, and you end up with the water level coming up because it can't get through the effluent filter. How frequently should you maintain an effluent filter? I'd say at the beginning, once every 6-8 months, and after that, depending on use and the size of the filter, you could push back to a year. That means any system with an effluent filter has somebody should be doing maintenance on that effluent filter at least annually. This is a discharge baffle glued on sideways, so they obviously didn't know what it was supposed to look like when they put it on. I've shown this one before. That's a clay pipe, right? Coming out to the ditch there on the bottom left with dye coming out of it. So it's just everything goes straight line out. The one on the right is in a ditch, but it's a big O. This is the one I'm talking about, 200 feet across the property, that you wouldn't necessarily find. So what are we waiting for? This is an in-use septic system. It's an old well tile. It's not a well, but it's an old well tile that's being used as a septic system. This is what we're trying to capture on the inspection process. These catastrophes that are staining our reputation, the one we're trying to improve to move forward with this industry. So it's our legacy. We've got to fix this stuff. But do it with some conviction. It can't just be what's easy for you right now. It has to be what's right for the industry. So I think one of the elements that we can do that in is in real estate, but it's also to help you not get sued so that everybody backs off from doing the right thing. We can look at where our vulnerabilities might be and the different procedures that we use. But you have to look. You do have the authority under the building code to look. So look. You don't necessarily have to dig it up. But if you're going to ask somebody to pump it, you better ask them to open it. If they're going to open it, why not be there? Does anybody here ask for pictures as part of their inspection procedure? And what pictures of what? Anybody here not have a digital camera accessible to them within arm's reach right now? Shouldn't that be a big component of these inspections? Like a benchmark? Show what the conditions look like? Some of our 3-hour inspections have 300 pictures. Granted, some of it are the memorabilia from the rich guy's basement, but I mean, they're still trying to picture. So what are we waiting for? Sewage at the ground surface. This is our indicator that there's a problem. I'll revert you back to the one that showed the groundwater table. This is not a good reason to fix a problem. This is a catastrophe, and we should be ashamed of ourselves that we don't have more conviction to fix this sooner. So here's a quick case study. This will segue into some stuff with OOWA in the future of how do we describe dealing with this. Because right now it's under our purview under 10,000 liters per day. This is a community of houses in a hamlet, any town, Ontario, that has small lots that are completely undersized and the systems are 60 years old. 3-bedroom, 2,200 square foot home, 50-year-old septic system. We put right in our reports that septic systems last 35 to 45 years. So if it's over that, I'm saying it's vulnerable to failure based on its age. I don't even have to do the inspection. That's the ones that don't, that put my average at 3 hours, so it's going to leave my office. There's no signs of bed failure at the time we're there, nothing coming to the ground surface. 6 meters from the house to the property line. The leaching field's in that 6 meters. The building code requires 5 meters to the dwelling and 3 meters to the property line, so we're screwed. So you know what they did? They connected to the municipal stormwater, and so did all of their neighbors, because they had no other options. We can do better than that. It's called decentralized. It means each of these houses will probably have a septic tank and maybe a treatment unit, and there would be a small force main low pressure, they'll collect all that effluent for dispersal somewhere else in this community. They can't get a sewer. There's nowhere near a sewer. The sewer costs $300 million to put there, and 30% of that a year to operate it. So this is what on-site decentralized is supposed to be about. How do we fix these problems? The short term, put in a hole in it. Cost of living goes up there, but there's a cost of living problem there because they don't have septic systems. That's the way it is. But if we rally the troops and say we can do better than that, the solutions already exist in Ontario. We just need to accept that management of these systems isn't going to be easy. It creates jobs. And it's necessary. I will take questions.
How much?
How much does it cost? We have flat rates for you. No, I'm just kidding. No, it's a flat. We do a flat rate system. It's $550, but we do the digging. We do the report, and the turnaround is 3 days.
It's the phase 1, phase 2, but no trench excavation.
No trench excavation. We don't take any equipment on site, but it's $550. And it's a flat rate. Doesn't matter where it is. And this isn't a sales pitch. I'm just telling you what we charge to do that.
Is that include a pump?
No,
Pump out
I don't want to pump out down unless it's necessary. If there was a pump out involved, it would be subcontracted, but we don't include in that price because as I've tried to, I don't think it's absolutely necessary. Yep.
You had said that you do phase 1 and phase 2 as part of the real estate transaction.
Correct.
When you read the best practices guide for the purpose of maintenance inspection, it talks about phase 1, move to a phase 2 if.
If you do all elements of phase 1,
And you notice that there is outward signs of failure, obviously.
no, if you notice there's a vulnerability to risk or risk of failure. That's what it says. So if you do all elements of phase 1, it should guide a phase 2. The risk for me on phase 1 is that it's a real estate transaction and the report's going to be reviewed by 2 lawyers. So that's a risk enough to say we're going to do phase 2, so we blend it all together.
From a real estate transaction, take that
Yeah.
off.
Yep.
And look at it from our end,
Mhm.
okay? From the municipal inspection in terms of accomplishing this maintenance inspection program that the province has said is mandatory. How are we getting from phase 1 to phase 2 based on vulnerable to risk? Where are some parameters?
I would suggest, as I tried to do earlier, that we had considered doing a better job at the outset of setting parameters for third-party inspection companies for the exact criteria, and you're doing this with your pumper report already, but they have to have the right insurance. You set the criteria for what qualifications they have, what the report says, and what elements are within it. If you did all those things, if we all did all those things, you put all the risk into the private sector, and then you're just doing it administratively. I'll tell you right now, I am not bidding any RFPs ever for doing these maintenance inspections for municipalities. Do you know why? I want the residual. I want to maintain the systems and do real estate inspections. I can't be tied into that. But the other problem I have, and I don't know if anybody in here did this, don't ask for RFPs from qualified engineering or consulting firms to give you a full-blown, I asked for a phase 1, phase 2, I have 1,200 houses, I want it done by this date, short time frame. I give you a price, $800 an inspection. You take that to council and say, let's give ourselves an extra 2 years, and we're gonna cut it down to $250, we're gonna do it with our staff, and we're gonna cut all these elements out of phase 1 and phase 2. Don't do it. It's not fair to the private sector. We're trying to actually bid these jobs. And then we find out later, we're bidding against you guys. So if nobody's gonna say it, I just did. Don't do that. It's not right. Oh, collusion. You know what your price is gonna be, you're just trying to satisfy it when you sell it to council. I don't like it, so I said it. I don't know if that answered your question.
Not at all, actually, but when you talk about setting those parameters, requesting the
Yep.
insurance, under what authority?
Under the authority that you're not gonna accept it if they don't do it. Any more authority than you're telling them to get a pump out, which you don't have and you're doing.
But under what, I guess under what authority do we have to say to our private sector, here's the criteria for doing a third-party certificate?
Because you won't accept it. You won't accept it unless it meets your criteria. It's simple. Nobody's gonna argue that from the private sector. They're not gonna say, you don't have authority to ask me. You're saying to people that have to get a pump out, you don't have authority to ask them for. So ask the private sector, because this is gonna get away from you guys. It is. When you're dealing with all the permits that deal with the part that only you can deal with, on the permit side, the inspections are gonna be something you wanna hack off. Let somebody else deal with that. It's a good place to start, and we'll call it an inventory. but in my view of things, and it's just that. But to be clear, I worked as a public health official with CDO duties for 4 years. I've been on that side of the desk. I do understand the cost implications and counsel and all those things. I get it. But we have an opportunity to do better. So I just don't want to set a template for what is your reality of how you deal with your area if people are going to take this dialogue and use it as a template for the rest of the province. So we can set a really good example, and I think you have. The programs that you set up, under the volatility of your ratepayers and the way people are going to accept it politically, I think all the programs you set up have been really good. And they're a great first step. And you've done a lot of work to get where you are. But let's just be sure we call what we're doing what it actually is. And if it's not a phase 1 inspection to its entirety, who's going to enforce on you that you didn't do an entire phase 1 within the 5 years? Who's going to enforce that on you? No one has any jurisdiction to come down and tell you to do anything. If they're not giving you any money, they're going to get what they get. So, do not create a time frame for yourself that is so short that you have to do it less than right, or less than perfect if you can, in order to meet a time frame no one's going to enforce. If there's an enforcement strategy, it would have been on them completing their review of your plans to make sure you can meet the time frames. So take your time, do it right, call it what it is, and protect yourself and improve the whole program. All the contractors in your area are going to be happy for it. You're not going to be popular. Is it your job being popular? You know it's not my job being popular. I don't care. Thanks for your time.
We're going to take